Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to this episode of The Wisdom of, where we try to get below the tips, tricks, and hacks that the world seems obsessed with in an increasingly challenged world, socially, politically, economically. And I am just so excited about our guest today. Jim Garrison is a visionary scholar, social activist, and founder of Ubiquity University, a global learning institution devoted to transforming education and fostering the evolution of human consciousness. And I'm just fascinated by his journey. It spans more than 5 decades of leadership in international relations, sustainability, and transformative learning. Fascinatingly, from co-founding the State of the World Forum alongside Mikhail Gorbachev to powering new forms of global collaboration through citizen diplomacy, he's dedicated his life to addressing what he calls the civilization challenges of our time. And they are climate change, nuclear risk, and the transformation of human awareness. You know, we really need to think about this. And at the heart of Jim's work lies a simple yet profound idea that lasting change begins in consciousness. And he's written, he's taught, he's started global initiatives. He's become one of the world's leading voices on how wisdom, education, and systems thinking can be harnessed to really shift the patterns of transformation and reveal how new civilizations and people within them can live and evolve. And Jim, it feels like you were purpose made for the wisdom of. So welcome, and thank you so much for giving us this time.
My pleasure.
So, Jim, the obvious question is, what sparked this journey? It's 50 years of pretty deep work. What was the spark of the journey? And then I want to kind of backfill into the work with Mikhail Gorbachev and so many other things. But what sparked the journey? What was it that triggered this for you?
Well, I'll tell you, it actually started when I was a very little boy. I was a missionary kid in Taiwan. I had been born in China, and my parents were conservative Baptist missionaries, and they were preaching the gospel. And I was playing with the little Chinese kids. And one day I went into a Buddhist temple, and I saw a monk sitting in perfect repose before the Buddha. I sat contemplating him, and I realized that he was in a place that needed respect, not condemnation.
Right.
That he wasn't going to hell. He was going somewhere very elevated and enlightened. And that set up a dialectic between me and my father as a missionary, between me and the missionary school that I was in. And even though that was very painful, it was the most important thing that ever happened to me. And I am so glad it happened when I was a child, because I understood what I've never forgotten, that what you're being taught by society doesn't mean it's true.
Mm.
And I realized that this notion that if you didn't believe in some guy that lived 2,000 years ago on the other side of the world, you were going to hell, that cracked the cosmic egg of my life and enabled me to think out of the box, to have ideas without boundaries. So when I became 18, I was back in the United States by that point, and they wanted to draft me to the US Army for Vietnam. And because I'd broken out of the box as a child, I realized that this was not something I was prepared to do. So I refused the draft. So that's really important, that if one is going to be truly creative, one has to learn to question authority. I think wisdom begins as an act of rebellion. And just to comment on this philosophically, because my training has been in philosophical theology and history. This is really the basis of Plato's allegory of the cave. We're all in a cave and we're all shackled and we're looking at the back of the cave, and there's fires that the political elites have arranged, and we see the flickers on the far side of the caves and we think it's real. And then somebody says something to us, or we have an experience, and we look down and we realize that we're shackled. And as Plato says, we begin to stand up and we realize that the shackles are the constraints we put on ourselves. And we turn around and we go to the mouth of the cave and we look out and we see there's this bright sunshine and incredible world out there. And when we go back in to tell our friends, hey, reality's out there at the mouth of the cave, they will resist us. And he says, and they will even kill you because they prefer the delusion. And I think wisdom is that capacity to understand that we are unbounded and that we are relative parts of a larger whole, not the center of the world. And so whatever awakening I've had came out of these childhood and teenage experiences where I learned to question authority, think for myself. And what I realized over my life is if you start to think for yourself, you're always different from everybody else.
And there's so much to unpack in what you just opened up and shared. I got multiple thoughts running through my mind, but the first one is, do you, when you start to think at this level of consciousness, do you also start to find yourself in cycles where, as you look deeper, what you believed you found behind you was the truth as you walked outside, and then you go behind that another layer and find that there's another truth and another truth? Are you constantly realizing that what you felt was truth was actually not yet the truth, and then there's something else? And is that the lifetime journey, really? Is this pursuit of truth?
Well, I think that's absolutely correct. And I think that's why Socrates has been such an important figure in my life, because he said that wisdom is a disposition of deep inquiry, that wisdom resides never in the answers. Wisdom, he said, resides only in the questions. And it's our ability to keep questioning what we think is true, question authority, question conventions. That's what Socrates did for his whole life. And as you know, that's why he was executed. He was asking people too many questions, particularly among the young people, and they were beginning to question authority. So the Socratic method and its emphasis on questions and the Greek notion of philosophy is a way of life. It's not an ideology. An ideology is not wisdom.
Yeah.
An ideology is a construct. Wisdom is always seeking deeper truths through deeper and deeper questions. And that's why the Greeks taught that wisdom is actually a disposition of being and a way of life, motivated by inquiry.
Interesting. And of course, the Socratic method these days is understood by a lot of people. And my understanding was Socrates never really wrote statements in the way that Plato did. He asked a lot of questions. And so when Socrates is quoted, is he being quoted, or is Plato or some others, benefiting from his questioning, really doing that work? So, when you think in these terms, you will, and you're questioning everything, you'll find yourself in conflict with a lot of people. And, you see lifelong learning as a revolutionary act. It's part of the principle of Ubiquity University and wanting to create this kind of a much more powerful way of education for people. Um, but of course, if you just go at people and challenge their entire perception of what is real, you are going to get, and as you said, Socrates was killed because of this, you are going to get pushback. What have you learnt in terms of clever ways, intelligent ways to bring this to the surface so that people actually come along with the questioning as well? It's a skill to actually bring people in a dialogue that is outside the boundaries of their thinking. I'd love to know, because leaders of companies and businesses would benefit from this. Certainly, young leaders would benefit from this. What is the skill of bringing people on a challenging journey that may question everything that they believe to be true? Are there some things that you've picked up over the 5 decades of doing this?
Yeah, I think the singular uh, truth for me, Simon, in contemplating your question is that I learned a very long time ago, it doesn't do very much good to try to convince people of anything. I have enough work to do on myself.
Mm,
So for me, living my truth in an authentic way is the best way to transform other people. So rather than trying to convince people of something, I just live my life, you know? So when I refused the draft, for example, I wasn't trying to convince anybody. I simply refused the draft.
mm,
And what that did, because I was standing for something, then all of a sudden, all kinds of people became curious. Why are you refusing the draft? And as long as I was speaking my truth, rather than arguing with people about an ideology, first of all, it's much deeper explanation because it's existential, not theoretical.
mm.
Most disagreements are happening at the level of theoretical, ideological
Yeah.
discourse. But when you're sharing your life, your pathos, what you stand for, it engenders a qualitatively different dialogue with whoever it is that is around you. So I've always tried to lead by example and not try to convince anybody of anything. I have enough work to do transforming my own life to get out of the cave and and explore the big wide world out there.
Yeah. So, you know, doing the work on your own transformation, but I suppose doing it in a bit of a public way
Yeah.
is actually the method, if you like. And so, um, you know, as you explore some, your earlier work was on nuclear culture, the plutonium culture, and you've been through various phases with the World Forum and things. You think in time frame wise, you think in civilization time frames. When I use that term, the idea of a civilization time frame, what does that mean to you? Because the world today is operating on very short time frames, which does bring you to transactional thinking and actually push and shove in reality. When you expand out to civilization timeframes, what does that mean? Because leaders, I think leaders today need to be a bit more long term in their thinking than they are. It's a real problem. I'd love to just explore the idea of civilization timeframes with you.
That is a great question. And I have many thoughts because that is the context within which I think.
Mm.
And I need to start with the dissertation, my PhD dissertation at Cambridge, where I contemplated the question of why it is that after billions of years of evolutionary life on planet Earth, our species in our generation has brought the entire life process to the brink of extinction through thermonuclear war. And of course, now climate change.
Mm.
What is it about us humans that we can't even comport normal business except under the threat of killing each other? And now the mega death of destruction of nuclear missiles. And it's really important for people to take in. United States, Britain, France, Russia, China all have their nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert.
Mm.
We're living our normal lives under the threat of instantaneous megadeath if anybody makes a mistake. That, sir, is insane.
Mm.
So why are we doing this? So that was the question that I pondered in my dissertation. And I used a Jungian analysis, Carl Jung, the
Yeah.
psychiatrist, Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist. And there's a lot that I can say about that, but just to distill down the essence, he wrote an essay in the fall of 1945 called After the Catastrophe, which I recommend to you and all of your listeners. Read Carl Jung's essay, After the Catastrophe, in which he said, as he contemplated what happened with the Second World War and the Holocaust, he said that what came to him is that that was only a curtain raiser for what was to come.
Mm.
And that what's happening at the level of Western civilization is that we are concluding a 2,000-year phase that is coterminous with the age of Pisces in the astrological zodiac. And that the age of Pisces, which if you know your astrology is two fish in opposition to one another. So you have 2,000 years ago the intensity of the light of Christ now turning into its opposite with the darkness of Antichrist. And that was the book that I published out of my dissertation was called The Darkness of God, Theology After Hiroshima, that we were going into a very dark time. And if you think about the last 80 years,
Mm.
we now have brought the entire life process to the brink of extinction. We've initiated global ecological collapse. We've got instability at every level of human affairs. We've just unleashed AI in a completely unregulated way. We're transacting genocide in Gaza. And so what we're experiencing, just to come to the conclusion for something for people to think about, I think there's four levels of what's happening right now. If you want to talk the big view,
Yeah.
one is we're we're seeing the end and the collapse of Judeo-Christianity. And I think the genocide in Gaza is a death knell to the legitimacy of the Judeo-Christian religious ethos. I think we're also experiencing the death knell of Western civilization. And it's worth just noting that it was 100 years ago next year that Otto Spengler wrote his masterwork, The Decline of the West. And what he said was going to happen over the next century was the collapse of the Western civilizational ethos.
Mm.
Why, he said? Because of the moral rot that had been accumulated over 500 years of colonialism. I think we're also experiencing right now the collapse of the American empire. I believe I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C. We're also experiencing the collapse of American democracy. We're seeing the rise of authoritarian all over the world. So, we ain't in Kansas anymore.
Mm.
And it's very important for people to take in and to understand the broader civilizational context of the rise and fall of civilizations, the rise and fall of religions, the rise and fall of institutional governance. And it is in that moment of civilizational collapse, but also civilizational opportunities, that means to me that we are in the most exciting period in all of human history.
Yeah.
Because the deeper the crisis, the greater the opportunities. And so I am so excited because, again, you can criticize and you can challenge, but you can also do what the I Ching advises from ancient China, that the best way to combat evil is to make energetic progress in the good.
I love that.
And as I was saying earlier, that's how I've tried to live my life. So I'm aware of the context, but founded Ubiquity University out of an ideal of bringing into the world a university based on Plato's three great virtues of truth, beauty, and goodness. And now working on the State of the World Forum that is trying to launch actually a whole new paradigm for human identity and development. So again, that's an example of focusing one's life on the pathway of wisdom around inquiry, because I think the wise people ask the deepest questions and then orient their life. Wisdom is a way of life toward the transformation that deep questions always catalyze in the soul. It's really important for me reading Plato, that Plato said that the act of inquiry out of the love of wisdom, he says, enlarges the soul.
That is such a profound thought that wisdom catalyzes in the soul. It's this idea that indelibly changes you, and as you unpack that 2,000-year sort of reversal of cycle, and people listening to this, could have been kind of just getting a little low.
It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just put it out there again to stimulate thought and discussion.
Yeah, and importantly, though, on the other side of that, if you think in terms of civilization timeframes, there are cycles between light and dark. And so, yes, there's a lot going on, but there's also a lot of opportunity through and on the other side of. And, I think the worst thing that anyone could do is pretend like nothing is going on.
Exactly.
That is the worst possible thing you could do at any moment in time, actually, is pretend like nothing is going on, sitting in the cave watching the flames flickering on the wall when actually everything's happening, behind you, which is fascinating. So, the World Forum, the State of the World Forum that you formed with Mikhail Gorbachev, I kind of want to dig into that and what that's about. And I want to dig into Ubiquity University a little deeper. I have a professional and personal interest in the state of education and the nature of it, and inquiry and reflective learning and so on. Let's talk about co-founding the State of the World Forum with Mikhail Gorbachev. Firstly, that's not an experience everyone has every day, so I'd be interested in actually how that comes about, and then what is it that the forum is really trying to achieve in a deeper level, so people can think about, for those people that are listening to this, that are thinking, okay, I need to dig into this a bit further and be a little more active, nuclear proliferation, climate change, as you say, authoritarianism worldwide. There's a lot going on. And, there'll be some people thinking, well, I just need to at least dig in and do my bit. And maybe my bit is just work on myself, you know, um, don't take everything as read, be more informed, have a deeper inquiry. So, for those people that are opening up their thinking with this, step me through the State of the World Forum. How did that get going? What was that
Sure.
journey like a little bit in terms of, some of the things that occurred, but then also what is it the forum is trying to do?
Great question. Thank you. The forum, my meeting with Gorbachev came out of my doctoral dissertation because when I would tell people what I was writing about, they would all say, well, of course we need nuclear weapons because of the Russian threat. I
Mm,
went, wait a minute. We need to blow up the world because we don't like somebody. But I realized I'd never been to Russia. So in the fall of 1982, I traveled to what was then the Soviet Union and spent several months traveling all over uh, Russia and meeting all kinds of people and I realized something fundamental, Simon, and that is we don't need nuclear weapons because of the Russian threat. We need the Russian threat because of our nuclear weapons.
mm, you're right.
That it's the technology we possess that needs a legitimation, and that inversion changed my world. So anyway, I started to work with the Russian people that I'd met on that trip, and to make a long story very, very short, I ended up meeting all kinds of people on the Politburo of the Soviet government, and then in December of 1991, I met Gorbachev through a whole series of extraordinary circumstances. I was actually the last foreigner that he received in his Kremlin office before he resigned on December 24th, 1991.
Mm,
And starting in January 1992, we met again and we decided we were going to work together and create the Gorbachev Foundation. And then between 1995 and the year 2000, we convened in San Francisco and then in New York, what we called the State of the World Forum, where we brought more diversity together at more levels than anybody had ever pulled off up to that time. And Jane Goodall, who just recently passed, was one of the co-chairs. Mohammed Yunus in Bangladesh, Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, Elie Wiesel, all the great personages of that time
mm,
were involved. And then 9/11 happened. And Gorbachev and I met and we realized that any kind of elegant politics was no longer possible given the war on terror. You remember the invasion of
mm,
Iraq and Afghanistan and all that. So he went off, and I went off and got involved in the development of Ubiquity University. So I went into academia. And then last fall, year ago, this month, a friend of mine who'd been involved in the original State of the World Forum had this very powerful vision. And she called me up and she said, Jim, you need to recreate the State of the World Forum. The world needs that now.
mm,
So I instantly knew that was true. And so I launched in. I left the job that I was doing here in Washington and just went full bore on the State of the World Forum. And this is important because I want to dwell on this for just a minute, Simon, because it's so crucial. I realize that the challenge in recreating the State of the World Forum is that there's no Gorbachev.
mm,
There's no personality in the world today of such superordinate gravitas that he or she could convene the world. So I pondered it for several months and then realized that, given my experience with Socrates, that it was not a person that could convene the world. It was a question.
Okay.
And the question is, how should humanity at this time elevate its consciousness to deal creatively with what came to me were the four most fundamental truths, data points of our world. Number one, all of us, everywhere, doesn't matter who you are or where you are, we're experiencing ecological collapse and escalating climactic turbulence. Number two, at every level of human affairs, we're experiencing turbulence and instability, no matter who you are or where you are. Instability and turbulence is now in our lives. Number three, while all this is going on, we've just unleashed exponential artificial intelligence, unregulated. And it is transforming our world in powerful ways as we speak. And number four, the US government is informing us that non-human technologies and non-human intelligences known as UFOs and extraterrestrials are here on Earth. And there's been contact and communication for some time. If you think about those four data points, what emerges are four intelligences. We have human intelligence, we have nature intelligence, we have artificial intelligence, and we have cosmic intelligence. And they're all impinging on us simultaneously. So on the one hand, ecological collapse, turbulence at every level of human affairs, escalating danger of nuclear war, genocide, extraordinary financial and geostrategic and economic instability worldwide, right as we're teetering on the brink of self-destruction. What's emerging? Nature intelligence and cosmic intelligence. And so we're reconvening the State of the World Forum around what we're calling the multi-intelligence revolution. How should humanity at this moment understand the importance of nature intelligence? The reason why we're in the mess we're in is because human intelligence has gotten out of sync with nature intelligence.
Yeah.
How do we get in touch with the cosmic intelligence? And what that means educationally, which we can get to later, it means that for the first time, education needs to be oriented not to memorizing information so you can pass tests, but enabling people everywhere to learn the language of consciousness.
Interesting. Yeah. Do the first part of the question again about the four. The first part was to raise the level of human consciousness.
Yeah, how do we raise the level of consciousness so we can creatively respond to the four data points, the four central challenges of ecological collapse, instability at every level of human affairs, exponential AI, and the reality that we are not alone.
Yeah.
Extraterrestrial intelligences are here. They've been here for some time, and there's direct evidence of retrieved craft, retrieved bodies, and sustained contact. How do we put those data points together? Because those, in my view, are the fundamental data points that, if brought together, would catalyze the elevation in consciousness we need, because the only way to engage in interspecies communication is through clairvoyance, it's through mental telepathy. So why or how do we learn these new skills at this moment? That's wisdom.
Yeah. This,
That's wisdom.
yeah, this idea of how do we elevate human consciousness in the context of four critical intelligences: nature intelligence, human intelligence, artificial intelligence, and cosmic intelligence. Um, it just bubbles up a couple of thoughts for me. The first one is we are probably the only species on the planet that has species ego. We have this unique thing in humans called species ego, which causes us to
I'll
believe,
say
yeah, which causes us to believe that we are the intelligence,
exactly.
right? And
Exactly.
it's almost impossible to contemplate that there is an intelligence broader and deeper than our own, and yet we're such a nanospeck in the concepts of space, you know,
Absolutely.
and so is planet Earth. Recently they released another report saying there's clear evidence of water flows on Mars. Well, should we be surprised by that? In fact, we have this species ego, and an easy response to the question that the State of the World Forum is asking, would be, well, you're crazy, Jim. Cosmic intelligence, nature intelligence. We get human intelligence because we've got species ego. That feels good. That makes sense to us. But and artificial intelligence, well, we know that's around us, so we can live with that. But this other stuff, and yet much of the world today thinks in a 2,000 to 3,000 year time frame in terms of civilization. In Australia, we have a 60,000-year-old living culture
The
here,
Aboriginals.
you know. So we don't dive back into 55,000 years ago to kind of explore with them what was kind of going on. So our time frame is
But
so
you ask any of the Aboriginals about the extraterrestrials, the star people as they call them, and
right.
they'll all tell you, of course that's true. The only group in the world that doesn't understand because we become so disconnected from nature that we don't know the reality of the extraterrestrials, but indigenous people worldwide and most people around the world take for granted.
Yeah.
Only the Western mind that
Yeah.
has lost track of the plot here.
Well, it's this species ego that we have.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That other species don't carry ego with the things they do. They just do it because it's a part of function. Lions don't hunt because of ego. They hunt because of hunger. So they're not out there going, hey, we're the king of the jungle, so we should go and prove that to some other animals. They kind of, if you observe lions in the wild, they hunt and eat and then they sleep a lot. you know, just so the easy opt out to the question of the State of the World Forum would be, yeah, but okay, that's a bit much. And my interpretation of what you're really challenging people with the State of the World Forum being driven by that central question is, for goodness sake, people start pursuing deeper inquiry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's back to start asking the questions. So if human consciousness is this depth and ability for questioning, and this wisdom through questioning finds its expression in the soul, we must all become deep, rich curators of great questions for what is happening behind us, not what we're seeing on the wall of the cave in front of us.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And to your point of ego, what is at stake for humanity
Yeah.
is that this delusion that we're the apex species and we're the only intelligence has brought us to the brink of extinction.
Hmm.
And what the opportunity is in aligning ourselves with nature again, aligning ourselves with cosmic intelligence, through which artificial intelligence will be integrated into a larger matrix of benign consciousness. that's going to enable humanity for the first time to transition from this notion of human superiority and dominance over nature to, I would call it, a sacred reciprocity with nature.
Mm.
If we can make that transition, I think we're going to survive. If we don't make that transition, we're going to either destroy ourselves or seriously damage ourselves in the larger planetary ecosystem. And I believe that it is of, I would say, divine timing, going back to your earlier point about civilizational transition, that nature intelligence and cosmic intelligence is turning up at this moment. And if I could make one point, Simon, about this, it's very interesting that it was the ignition of the nuclear weapons in 1945 by the United States, first on July 16th, 1945, and then on August 6th and August 9th, dropping the bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that activated the UFO phenomenon.
Mm.
There have been thousands of people around the world over the last 80 years, including in Australia. There's very famous stories of sightings of kids in school in Melbourne, for example, that who report their interactions with these cosmic beings. And almost universally, they're warning people about our thermonuclear warheads, our nuclear power, and the way we're damaging our ecology. So this is an important point because what's happening is not just humans on planet Earth, but when we take actions like developing thermonuclear warheads, that activated alarm bells throughout, at least our quadrant of the galaxies, and other life forms began to show up. And all these drones that have been reported for the last year and a half have been coterminous with what the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist says is the most dangerous period since the beginning of the nuclear age, including the Cuban Missile Crisis. At the Cuban Missile Crisis, they put us 7 minutes to midnight.
Mm.
But over the Ukraine war and the escalating tensions and the deployment of nuclear warheads now sort of face to face in Eastern Europe and Russia and all the stuff that's happening and the complete demise of any of the nuclear treaties, the last nuclear treaty is set next February to be timed out. So the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists puts the atomic clock at 90 seconds to midnight. And guess what? There are drones all over. There are orbs all over. There's all kinds of contact with cosmic intelligence right now. It's extraordinary if you're paying attention. And Ross Coulthart, Australian, one of the great journalists, if you want to check out
Yeah.
Reality Check, is reporting on this all the time. And if you want to go to our website, stateoftheworld.forum, we're reporting on it too. But the drones that they're seeing over Copenhagen and Munich that caused the shutdown of the airports and so forth and so on, those aren't those aren't just drones. Those are unidentified anomalous phenomena, and they're mostly circulating over military bases with nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Interesting.
So we're in a very complex situation on planet Earth right now. And so your question of what constitutes wisdom at this moment is, in my view, how do we ask the biggest questions we can at a moment, particularly between 2025 and 2030? All of us know intuitively that we're going into probably the most consequential time in all of human history.
Mm.
And immense things are dying and collapsing, and immense things are rising and blossoming. And how humanity chooses its priorities will determine our fate. And the State of the World Forum, Ubiquity University, we're just little people, insignificant in the overall scheme of things, but we're trying to ask the biggest questions we can so that the decisions that humanity makes, which is going to determine our fate, will be as well informed as possible.
So, and it's interesting. Don't shoot the messenger, just check in on the message,
Yes,
and it doesn't really matter how the message comes to people that we are in a state, particularly with nuclear proliferation or the proliferation of nuclear weapons, especially, and what's happening with climate, with the climate of the planet. I think at gut level, most people recognize they're not heading in good directions.
absolutely.
Without science, without evidence, I think at gut level, a lot of people would feel like we're not heading in a good direction. So, I'm constantly encouraging people to not judge the message by the messenger. The messenger is an issue of style. How this person or this medium is presenting it is just an issue of style.
Exactly.
And it might not match your style, which is fine. But does the message resonate at some level and cause you to question? And, Ayn Rand spoke about, the first quarter of the 21st century. And, the real change will come not from, the people in power, but from small people, little people, like you
Absolutely.
and me. And, maybe the real intentionality here is that we all have a personal choice to make about our own consciousness and what we become aware of and what we continue to question and inquire about. And the worst thing that any of us could do is to not question anything and to, not to explore. The State of the World Forum and Ubiquity University, as you say, are not, you're not running countries. You're not Facebook. You're not Meta. You're not the world's largest technology companies with a reach of billions. But there's an active effort to put a really important question in front of people without presupposing the answer. Just
Exactly.
put a question out there. And
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, cause people to think and have dialogue, right?
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
we often talk about business in the Wisdom of show. And, we talk about high performance areas in the military, in sport, in the arts and things. And everyone's looking for the answer. Everyone's looking for, how do I become a better leader? What do I need to do as a leader of a company? And what if the answer was ask better questions? What if it was actually that simple?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's almost too simple for it to be acceptable. But ask better questions, then another better question, then another better question. Form a habit of questioning 5 times before you arrive at a solution. And because questioning is the lost art form.
Yeah.
It's a language all of its own.
Well, and I think just to dwell on that for a moment, that's why Plato wrote dialogues.
Hmm.
Because if you're presenting an answer, you present dogma or an ideology. If you're living in the questions, by the nature of things, as Socrates said, the only thing that I know, he said, is that I know nothing.
Yeah.
And living in the question makes us equal because you're asking a question in a spirit of unknowingness. So what you think, Simon, is just as interesting as what I think. And so the question equalizes people, answers subordinate people.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And that's why I love the question. So we're just establishing actually a 6-year process between 2025 and 2030, pondering this question. And in fact, we're offering a $100,000 award if any of your listeners are interested in who can answer the question. How does human intelligence come together with nature intelligence, artificial intelligence, and cosmic intelligence to co-create a flourishing future.
Yeah.
So they can go to
Yeah.
stateoftheworld.forum and they can sign up.
Well,
Uh, and we're going to be launching it. Then we're going to be increasing the amount of the award as the years go on. But this is the question of our time. And I'm so excited because you don't have to have answers. You're just saying, contemplate the question for a minute.
absolutely.
And
And it will be it is such a deep thing to contemplate. As soon as you ask the question in that framing, the first thing that popped into my mind was, well, slow down economic force.
yeah, yeah.
Commerce, economic force creates so much urgency.
Oh, totally.
We actually don't stop to
Totally.
think through these things at all, right? And as I said, it's easy to dismiss this and say, oh, this is a theoretical conversation, but there's seldom dispute in the question. There's always conflict in the answer.
Exactly.
And, so if I said, what should we do to protect children from harm on the roads outside of schools when they're crossing the road at the end of school and all that sort of thing? And if I put 100 reasonable people in the room, they would say, whatever it takes. Then if we said, okay, so we should spend thousands of dollars on an overhead footbridge and thousands of dollars on traffic lights and stop all the traffic when the kids are coming out of school, so that the kids can cross the road safely and everything else. People go, well, hang on a minute, though. That's a major road. And so you can't really put people, the conflict is always in the answer. It's never in the question. And so, we have to rise above conflict to get to a deeper answer, a deeper consideration. And so going back to the art of questioning, I'd love people, if the one thing people take out of this is, elevate your conscious inquiry so that you elevate your own consciousness about some of the things that are going on. And, people don't have to agree with those four major issues that the State of the World Forum has identified. They don't have to agree that, the real question is, how do we, combine human intelligence with nature, artificial and cosmic intelligence, but raise the level of consciousness about the quality of the questions that you ask. If you're a leader in business, if you're a political leader, if you're an educator, if you're just a member of society. And the reality is we all have a role to play. And the only thing that probably isn't acceptable is passively complaining, because on the other side of this turmoil is great opportunity if we can make it through. And there's no guarantees we will, but we should give it a go. I'd love to wrap up with just some quick response questions from you so people know a bit more about Jim, and then we'll wrap it up. If you could, and I'm just interested in your responses to these. I ask these questions every now and again, but if you could time travel to any period in history, where and when would you go to? And I'm more interested in why you would go to that period in history.
That's a great question. And, I would love to have hung out with the Buddha. I would have loved to have hung out with Jesus. I would have loved to have hung out with Alexander the Great, just to be there with a great personage that is going to transform history itself. Those would be the three people and times that I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall, or even Pythagoras, who was a contemporary of the Buddha in Greece. I would love to be there at a great moment,
Yeah.
that changed everything. What goes into a great moment? And the reason why I think we're in one of those great moments, Simon.
Yeah.
We're in one of those great moments. And so how does one live in a great moment? If you're there in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus, you don't want to be wasting your time selling wine or selling olives. You want to be on the mount. You
Yeah.
want to be listening to the man. But how do you know that the man is there when everything seems normal? You've got to somehow intuit the largeness, the momentousness of this moment. And I think what I carry with me is this notion that here, now, 2025 to 2030 is one of the most consequential moments in all of human history. So we need to live large.
Great. That actually covered my second question, which was if you could have been in any room to listen to the conversation, what room would you like to have been in? But you answered it by saying you'd love to have been inside these great moments. The question
Mm.
is, what rooms, what moments would you like to have been in? So the third question is before you saw that monk meditating and contemplating. So the child before that experience that then shaped the rest of your life, what did you think you wanted to be when when you grew up? Whereas that child never really grew up, you grew into.
Yeah.
Rather than growing up, you grew into what that child was shaped with. But what did you think you wanted to be?
You know, Simon, I never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. That's part of my problem. I guess I've always been insatiably curious.
Yeah.
Um, and I've always been, I guess, an action intellectual. I like to think, but I also like to act. And I've because I've been questioning authority, I've ended up in sort of adversarial relationships with the state, with state power over my life. I've been arrested, for example, numerous times for civil disobedience. You know, when I was at Harvard, I actually organized the takeover of the administration building, protesting Harvard support of apartheid in South Africa. We had a Harvard divest from South Africa campaign, and we took over the administration building. I've done big civil disobedience at the Pentagon, etc. And so I think that um, one needs to, in terms of to living large, in a moment of largeness, one needs to ask the deepest questions, coming back to full circle to Socrates, because it's the depth of one's questions, said Socrates, that is proportionate to the enlargement of the soul.
Mm.
Your soul has to be as big as the moment. And that requires deep work on yourself, a deep opening of the psyche to contain the dialectical energies of the moment between crisis and opportunities. You've got to be able to hold the polarities together. Because what Jung said is if you can understand that there's genocide in Gaza and the ETs are here, if you
Mm.
can hold that antinomy, those contradictions, and engage, he says, in the crucifixion of the ego as you hold these opposites, that's what transforms yourself.
Mm.
That's what makes you big as you need to be to encompass the moment that you've been gifted to experience. And if we're gifted with a moment of the same magnitude as JC Superstar 2,000 years ago, or Gautama Buddha in Nepal 2,500 years ago, if that's our moment, and I believe it is, we have to live large. Wisdom has to encompass the world. We have to hold the contradictions of our time with an equilibrium of heart that allows us to act with wisdom.
Mm. You speak, you're talking about such challenging concepts for people, um, with such a positive and optimistic undertone. You have a positive and optimistic demeanor and style, which perhaps is this idea of you must live large enough to meet the moment. And
Mm,
again, I go back to this idea of ego. When you find yourself in that large critical moment, perhaps we could say it's the soul that has to expand to meet the moment, not your ego. And,
Exactly.
if the ego expands to meet the moment, you probably won't meet the moment very well.
That's exactly right.
But if your soul expands to meet the moment, you'll probably handle it, at least personally, successfully, but maybe externally and for the world
And
successfully.
if it's your soul holding the moment, your ego then knows what to do because the ego then becomes the servant, not the master.
Yeah.
And you begin to understand the profundity of what Jesus said in Gethsemane, not my will, but thine be done.
Yeah.
How do we come to the point in our lives where it's not about I, me, mine, but is what can I do to serve the moment? What can I do to serve the next phase of human evolution and development? And that to me is when life begins.
Yeah. It's a great place for us to wrap this up. People are fascinated with the idea of finding their why, finding their purpose, and having an impact in the world. And sometimes actually still doing nothing. And maybe we should,
Couch potatoes.
yes, maybe we should be less obsessed with having an impact on the world and changing the lives of thousands, and instead become obsessed with just meet the moment. I love that idea. Just meet the moment.
Just
If you're a
meet them.
leader in business, if you're a leader in education, and if you're a leader in, politics, military, any avenues where you have a significant responsibility, meet the moment and meet the moment without ego. And if you're not a leader at a significant level, you still have the moment to meet. And elevate your level of consciousness as a part of that, and elevate the level of inquiry. Jim, this has been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
I'm sure to leave people, thinking, and heads spinning. But what would be the point of a podcast
Absolutely.
if it didn't leave people asking more questions at the end? So thank you so much for the generosity of time and particularly wisdom. I really appreciate what you've shared with us today.
It's been a pleasure, Simon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.